Okay. By now, you've all probably seen a headline or two like this, given some things going on, and a bunch of you actually reached out to me and asked that I comment and provide my thoughts on these headlines and where these headlines are coming from. So that's the point of this video today, getting into some of the issues with the, well, not the issues, but getting into the IPCC report that was just released. Here we go. So, full disclosure before we begin, I am a climate scientist for a living, so this actually does fall into my field of expertise quite nicely. So, we'll get into that there. I want to kind of cover in this video sort of my top-level thoughts, and the reason for that is all the hyperbole that you're seeing, and I do call it hyperbole, to be honest, here, and it's not very helpful hyperbole, I don't think, but anyway, is based upon a report that is actually significantly longer than what they could possibly put into an article. So this one was sent to me by a viewer on the BBC, but you've probably seen many, many other similar articles to this one come out within the last day or two as of the date of this recording and filming. And that's of course interesting with this here. Landmark study. I'm gonna have to push back immediately and say, no, this is not landmark study. I'm sorry, this is not landmark study at all. IPCC stuff has been going on for a very long time. We repeat these assessments every few years. This is nothing new in that sense. The big thing that happens with every IPCC assessment is the science all gets updated. And what have you. But before we get started, I want to clear up some things because there is a lot of confusion about what the IPCC is and what it isn't. And so I want to bring that up and what goes on with these things. So the IPCC, its basic job is, yes, it's part of the UN. It is part of the United Nations. And it's particularly about assessing the science related to climate change. That is its stated mission here as part of it. And again, I will provide all these links for you in the description. I encourage you to go look through it, examine it yourself, take a good look. The IPCC provides regular assessments of the scientific basis of climate change, its impacts and future risks, and options for adaptation and mitigation. And the reason I bring this out is because the report that came out today was just the start of what's going to happen this year and next year with IPCC. Actually, there will be more. So I don't want you to get too fixated on just this one report that comes out. There's, of course, going to be all the press and everything around it right now. There will be that. But there's going to be more than that coming in the very near future. So the way the IPCC reports are divided up is like every few years, like they're saying here, I'm not going to read all of this for you, but this IPCC was created in 1988, and they started doing their first assessment. The first assessment report of the entirety of the science was in 1990, I believe. It was then when that was released. The one that was the chunk of report that was just released now, and in reality it's a chunk of a report. It's not a full report, at least not by IPCC standards. The current one that we're on is going to be the sixth assessment report of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. The sixth one around. So the last one was in 2013, 2014 when it came out. This one is, the first chunk of it is this year as it just came out, 2021. The rest of it will be coming out next year in 2022. So you actually need to keep an eye out for that. But IPCC doesn't ever conduct its own research. It's always a synthesis of all the collective body of research that is available, which one of the reasons IPCC is so gigantic and the reports are so gigantic is because of the breadth and the huge amount of scientific studies that gets put into it. And so it reflects a diverse range of views and expertise and what have you. And I'm going to get into a little bit in here, and I want to point this out, something very important because of a few things that I think most folks don't understand with this. So there's three main working groups with this. The first working group is the physical basis of climate change. So that's all the physical climate science. Things about projections and, how the climate is projected to change, things about observations and how we've observed the climate changing up until this point. Things like that are all included in the physical science basis of climate change chapter. Working group 2 is the impacts, adaptation, vulnerability chapter. That's where they take everything from working group 1 along with other research that is separate from that, and then go in and say, what are the impacts? What's kind of adaptation things going on? What are the vulnerabilities globally? And they are talking globally because IPCC is the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change run by the United Nations. So it is a global thing. Working Group 3 is the last one, and that's about mitigation, which is to say, how do you reduce the impacts that are in the second chapter, the second Working Group's report. What came out this week was the Working Group 1 report, which is to say it is all about the physical science basis of climate change. What we know, what we've observed, what we think is going to happen, just with respect to the climatic variables, or at least it's supposed to be entirely just with respect to the climatic kind of variables. And this does include things like sea level rise and temperatures and the likelihood for extreme heat and the likelihood for extreme events and things like that. That is all included under the Working Group 1 report. The Working Group 2 report is actually where, in my opinion, you're likely to get a little bit more on the hyperbole side, because that's the one that includes what the potential impacts would be. So that's where they start talking about ecosystems and biodiversity and impacts to economy and all those kinds of things will come in the next report that actually really comes. So that's not to say they're not trying to talk about physical science and what does it mean for all of those other things down past climate, because climate does have an impact on everything, whether you like it or not. That is a real true and honest thing, and I do agree with that statement myself as a climate scientist. And climate has an impact on what you can grow, what plants can be where, what species can live certain places. It does even have an impact upon, building codes are based on climate stuff. Construction work is based on climate-related stuff. Like, one of the things they have to include in contracts for construction is an allowable number of rainy days for construction workers not to be working. And that's kind of based on a climate thing of how often does it rain in an area. So I've done that before in past life, actually helped out get information that somebody needed for creating a construction contract. Things like that happen. So there's things like that in there, and they may try and go in that. So there's alongside the working group, there are other task forces and what have you. And there's a lot of things in here that are important here. And I don't know why they bothered with this. But then again, it is a UN thing, so take that for what it's worth. There are a lot of things here that there are a lot of people who will say that the IPCC is nonpartisan. And there are also others who will say that the IPCC is entirely partisan. And as is the case, at least in my humble opinion, as is the case, that is not entirely true. Neither option is entirely true. And that has to do with the review process. It has to do with how the reports themselves are generated. It has to do also with a couple of other things, and I was looking for it, and maybe I don't have it. Where is it? There was a graphic that has to do, okay, yeah, because there's a whole section here about how they go about preparing the reports, but there's this handy little graphic down here. So every time they do one of these reports, there's this whole thing of draft the outline, developed by experts who are nominated by governments and observer organizations. So each government who participates in the UN can nominate as many scientists as they'd like to be part of this. The panel, there's an executive panel that runs all this, approves the outline. There's then a nomination of authors, and governments and observer organizations, third-party organizations can then say, okay, we want to nominate these guys to be experts. We think they're great. And again, the leadership ultimately selects based upon the nominations that are written. From there, you have first-order draft that's prepared and reviewed, which is then reviewed. And those reviews actually take place pretty publicly. So, like, full disclosure, for one of the working group reports, not this one that just came out, but for a different one, I did get an invitation to review that myself, actually. And that was a pretty public invitation. I mean, it was sent to me through things that I follow as part of my regular work outside of being YouTube. And so they start with that. And once the first draft is reviewed by the experts, the group of authors goes back and revises it based upon the comments of the reviewers. And then you get to the second order draft. But at the same time you have the second order draft, you have a very important document that's written. It's where a lot of these news articles get their information from. And I'm going to explain that in a second. But that other document that gets a first draft at that point is what's called the summary for policymakers. And the summary for policymakers is quite often what is being referred to in these particular articles, not necessarily the full report itself. And there's a very good reason for that. Both of these are then reviewed and commented on, not just by the experts at this point, but also by diplomats and governments. And if you're seeing where I'm going with this and why it's not entirely a nonpartisan exercise, we're going to get there. Authors, after that second order draft is written and the first order draft of the summary for policymaking, after those drafts are written and reviewed, then you get a final draft report and summary for policymakers, which are then sent to the governments. The different governments then review the final draft in preparation for its approval. They provide comments. Then there's a working group panel that approves the summary for policymakers and accepts the reports and the publication of those reports. And I'm going to get into that a little bit more. I do believe I actually have the document here. Okay, here's the thing. And this is, again, why I say is not entirely nonpartisan. I'm going to say this in very sternly with this. A lot of the scientists who are involved in this are nonpartisan. They are experts in their field. They're brilliant at what they do. And their words should be taken seriously. It's the aspect of it where it gets to the summary for policymakers and you have governments and diplomats involved who are, of course, looking out for their own interests in a lot of ways, who then get involved and start editing. And as I'm going to say, as I can read this particular document here, is the IPCC's review process, which we covered in that sort of little graphic a second ago. The IPCC is committed to preparing reports that aim for the highest standards of scientific excellence, balance, and clarity. Multiple stages of review are an essential part of the IPCC process to ensure a comprehensive, objective, and transparent assessment of the current state of knowledge of the science of climate change. Expert reviewers and governments are invited at different stages to comment on the scientific, technical, and socioeconomic assessment and the overall balance of the drafts. The review process includes wide participation with hundreds of reviewers critiquing the accuracy and completeness of the scientific assessment contained in the drafts. Assessment reports and special reports are prepared by chapter teams of authors and review editors. See the IPCC fact sheet. How does the IPCC select its authors? The review editors ensure that all substantive comments received during review are given appropriate consideration by the author teams and ensure that genuine diversity in perspectives in the literature is reflected adequately in the report. The first draft of a report is prepared by the authors based on scientific, technical, and socioeconomic literature in scientific journals and other relevant publications. So it's important to note with this, the IPCC does not do its own research in here. They are relying on the breadth of published stuff in peer-reviewed journals to do this. So it's very important to understand that they are not trying to do research. They are trying to synthesize the research down into capturing what the state of the science is and what the scientific community or the sciences and institutions says about what's going on. The first order draft is reviewed by experts. Every interested expert is encouraged to submit comments. The working groups, members of author teams, governments, IPCC, observer organizations, and other organizations can all encourage experts to register as reviewers, facilitating the participation of experts encompassing a wide range of views, expertise, and geographical representation as possible. For the fifth assessment report, experts could register as reviewers through a process of self-declaration of expertise. After the expert review of the first order draft, author teams prepare a second order draft of the report, taking into account the review comments received. So this is sort of your standard peer review, really. A first draft of the report summary for policymakers is also prepared. These are subject to simultaneous review by experts and governments. So understand something. The summary for policymakers is subject to simultaneous review by experts and governments. Bear that in mind. Experts who registered for review in the first order draft of the report are automatically registered for this round of review. Further experts may register at this stage. Following receipt of review comments, author teams then prepare final drafts of the full report and the summary for policymakers, taking into account review comments received. The final draft of the report is distributed to governments for a final round of written comments on the SPM. Before governments meet in plenary session to approve the SPM, the summary for policymakers, line by line, and accept the underlying report. So here's the point I want to make with this, is right here at the end. This thing here where they're talking about approving the SPM line by line, that is literally true. Actually, I have had colleagues and friends of mine who have been there and to watch the process state that this is actually a very true thing. The governmental delegations go through the SPM in a plenary session where they're all together in one room, or at least they're supposed to be in one room. I don't know how they did it with COVID, but they're all together in one room, and they go through every single line of the summary for policymakers and decide whether or not to accept or reject it. And this is not necessarily the scientists that are the ones entirely reviewing this. This is governments meeting in the plenary session. So that does not necessarily mean it is the scientific agencies themselves as much as it is the government political figures that could be making that statement. That's not to say they don't try to be nonpartisan. This, part of the hope of this is that you, with the different governments and different competing views, you end up with a sort of nonpartisan thing at the end. But that is important to recognize that that's there. So that's why I say it's not entirely fair to say the whole IPCC process and all the assessment reports are utterly and completely nonpartisan. The thing is, the report itself, the underlying report, is. But most people in most of the articles that you're going to see with the hyperbole in there, and I honestly don't, I say hyperbole with derision. I do not think hyperbole is helpful. And for the record, yes, I do think the climate is changing. Yes, I do think humans are, in good part, responsible for it, and we do need to be doing something about it. I do not agree with the government-controlled solution, one size fits all for everything that comes from the government. I believe in a lot more grassroots from the bottom up than the top down. But anyway, that's kind of my position on that. That is unrelated to my expertise as a climate scientist, so please do not take it as my endorsement of that approach. Any hoozle. Let's see here. So that's the thing, is the underlying report isn't what gets reviewed by the government officials. That is pretty much left alone when the scientists have themselves agreed on it in the different author teams. And so that's important to understand. That could be justifiably argued as being nonpartisan. And part of the reason I say that is because there are hundreds of scientists that contribute to that. And I will show you the author list in a minute to make my point. There are hundreds upon hundreds of scientists that contribute to that. But what that also means is the summary for policymakers is often what gets used in articles. That is often what gets referred to in articles. That is what is given to policymakers in different countries. And of course, it's going to be probably what U.S. policymakers are going to see, more so than the underlying report itself. And that's fair and that's understandable for a reason here. And I will give you a very good reason why that's the case in a second. So this is the site for the 6th assessment report that's out. You can see the summary for policymakers. There's also technical summaries where you can get into the more technical kinds of things going on. There's the full report. There's errata, which those come up as they arise, because in a giant freaking report like this, you do have some errors and make mistakes. That's actually pretty normal for these kinds of things. It doesn't mean the science is wrong. So no, I will not let the folks who are going to go off on me with the climate change stuff. No, it doesn't mean the science is wrong. There are normal things that happen that you just make mistakes out of. That doesn't necessarily mean the conclusions are entirely wrong either. You can also get at the data access. This is actually some new. There's some interactive analysis here. There's some regional fact sheets that are new. There's also some outreach materials. They've really tried to improve their communication, because the last couple of times IPCC has been horrible to navigate on a website, which I can do a compare and contrast if you'd like. But there's a reason I want to show some of this. For one, because I hope you go and explore it, to be honest. And here's the reason why. The summary for policymakers, understand this. This is the summary of the Working Group 1 report. It is 40 pages by itself. That's why I didn't comment on it immediately yesterday. I was trying to get through it and read it and give you some distinct commentary, but I'm not necessarily going to do all of that today. And the reason that that's the summary is the full-blown report itself, providing the assessment of current evidence on the physical science of climate change, knowledge evaluation gained from observations, reanalysis, PLE, climate archives, climate model simulations, as well as physical, chemical, and biological climate processes. This sucker is at least 1,300 pages. There's a tremendous amount of information in here because there is so much being done with respect to climate now. And for case in point here's all the individual chapters for you that they go into. There's supplemental material for every single chapter. There's annexes in here involved for what models are used and radiative forcing, modes of variability, and all this jazz. Things like that. This is where a lot of the sort of caveating if you will, is going to take place. The summary for policymakers, because it is meant to be short and sweet and get to the just points there, doesn't necessarily have hyperbole in it itself, but because it's short and sweet and straight to the point, and this time also they actually put in a lot of very good, well-made graphics that can be used, and you might have seen a few of them in news articles, which I think actually, let me go back here to the BBC one. This one actually, this is in the summary for policymakers right here, and you can see it labeled. So, and I'm going to show that in a second, but that's why people look at it, and it's a high level summary. But understand that because this is the one where there is more involvement by different governments in the writing of it and approving literally line by line what it says, that's where there can be some, I'm trying to be nice about it, because there can be some hyperbole introduced there. And that is not the fault of the scientists. I want to say that very straight up with you, everybody. That is not the fault of the scientists. Most scientists are not hyperbolic. We're, in fact, very overcautious most of the time. But that doesn't necessarily get people to do things, is what the thing there is. And so that's where that summary for policymakers becomes the important thing to sort of to summarize the science for everybody. So you don't have to read 1,300 pages. I will eventually, at some point, probably be reading through this entire report. At least this one, because this actually pertains directly to a lot of what I do in research myself anyway. So I will be reading it. Here is actually the summary for policymakers, and it is a PDF. You can go read it yourself. But I do want to show you this. This is the author list. This is what I meant literally here. These are all the authors with their respective countries where they are contributing from. And you can see China, Canada, US, UK, Colombia, Italy, Germany, Switzerland, from everywhere. I actually know a few of the names on here, so myself. So let's see. Yeah. And these are the drafting authors. So these guys are the folks who had the primary responsibility of drafting. A lot of these folks are scientists, but again, as I said, it's not all scientists who get to review and approve everything line by line. Date of the document. So this was actually really, really recent. I don't know if this is Central Time. I think this is Central Time Eastern, but Central Standard Time in the U.S. I'm not sure off the top of my head, but anyway, very recently approved, as you might tell here. And also more contributing authors here. So they helped write, but they didn't write the main words here. They helped edit, probably was most likely, before it went to the plenary panel to be reviewed by the different governments and approved line by line. Summary should be cited as. So yeah, the document here is available. They just haven't done the copy editing, so don't take any account for that. That's just, we want to get the contents what we want it to be. We just need to get it arranged and copy edited. So this is the uncopy edited version. So they've arranged it in a few different sections, and this is actually different from the last assessment report. In the last assessment report, I don't think I have it open. Oh, I do. Wait a second. I do. So in the last assessment report, the last summary for policymakers, it looked a lot more like this, where they were doing observed changes in the climate, and then they did this atmosphere, ocean, all the way down here kind of thing. And you can go back and forth and compare, but I'm going to get to, when I get to the end, please stick around to the end of this video, because I'm going to ask you, if you go back and forth and compare, or you're looking at something, you have a question about something, there's a point I want to make about that. Summary for policymakers presents key findings. So this is probably the one that you're hearing about, and you can always go and look, because with IPCC, I do appreciate what they do here. One of the things that they do is they do put in here, this is their sort of top line statement with respect to current state of the climate here, and they make points about, what's changed, what's new. The human influence has warmed the atmosphere, ocean, and land. Widespread and rapid changes in the atmosphere, ocean, cryosphere, and biosphere have occurred. And this is all cross-chapter kind of things. And there's specific figures that they've included in this chapter, which actually I'm going to show those in a minute. But you can also get into some of the underpoints. These are all underpoints that contribute to why they're saying this. So this is what you can look at here. And again, I encourage you to take a look at it, not necessarily with the hyperbole, and to ask questions about it. I am totally fine with anybody coming to me and asking me questions about these things. In fact, that's what I'm going to say to you all right now, is if you have questions about specific parts of the report or specific things that you've heard said in the news, comment, tell me, let me know. I can do a video response for you and just get it on the record. This is what they're saying. This is what the science actually says. I'll go digging in the report and find it for you. What they actually said about it and what was said about it in there, so that you don't have to worry about it. So yeah, this is a true thing here. It comes from different studies. And of course they have footnotes for everything. They are using a reference period of 1850 to 1900 to bear in mind, and there's a reason for this. So whenever you see a lot of the... let me go down to the graphic. Maybe that'll be easier. One thing I wanted to make a point on. You won't see this a lot in the news, but I think it's probably worth you all trying to understand, is that they do try and put things like this in here into the summary for policymakers to say, what are they confident about? What are they most sure about when they do this? So like this is high confidence in here. Here they're very confident about these statements that they've made in here. Where that's drawn from is that they do actually have very specific guidance for they follow in how they define confidence, how they define whether something is likely or unlikely to have occurred or will occur. And that actually, there's a handy guidance note that they wrote a while back. Yeah, so the level of confidence is expressed using 5 qualifiers: very low, low, medium, high, and very high. It synthesizes the author team's judgments about the validity of findings as determined through evaluation of evidence and agreement. Figure 1 depicts summary statements for evidence and agreement and their relationship to confidence. So there's evidence and there's agreement with it. So a lot of the times, as I've said before, science is a process. Repeat it over and over and over again. Different methods of doing things. Do you get the same results? Do you get more evidence? Do you get less evidence? And that's what they're talking about when they do this synthesis, is they look for studies where there's lots of evidence and lots of agreement, and that's where they get to this sort of high confidence at the top here. Where they don't have a lot of agreement between studies and they have very limited evidence, they'll state a conclusion, but they'll also tell you, and we don't really have a whole lot of confidence in this. So that's something to keep in mind, is IPCC does have this guidance. This guidance often gets ignored, unfortunately, when we're talking about the hyperbole side of things with news articles and what have you. A lot of those statements of confidence that are in the summary for policymakers and expounded upon in depth, actually, in the full report itself, get ignored. It's much unfortunate, because I do think the general public is quite capable when we talk about these things to understand that. I think you all are very smart out there. You don't necessarily need me. Experts are good things, but I'm not going to presume you an idiot. Let's put it that way. I think you all are very smart, and I'm happy to talk with you about anything related to this report. But that's the kind of thing that we get to with confidence. But it is somewhat dependent on the author's judgment here, which thankfully it's not one. If it was one person making a judgment on these kinds of things, I would say that it would be a problem. But this is not, as I said, for every single chapter, and I have actually the full report over here, for every single chapter. There is, of course, in the summary for policymakers, for every single chapter, there's coordinating lead authors, there's contributing authors, there's hundreds of people that get involved with this whole thing. So do not think this is just one person doing this in the slightest. There's actually quite a lot of them making a judgment on the evidence that's presented to them in the synthesis of research. That's also why we still have reviewers, too. With the different reviewers, they can end up adding more when those first-order drafts come out. This is flexibility in this relationship for a given... There is flexibility in this relationship for a given evidence and agreement statement. Different confidence levels could be assigned, but increasing levels of evidence and degrees of agreement are correlated with increased confidence. Confidence cannot necessarily be assigned for all combinations of evidence and agreement. In Figure 1, see paragraph 8. Yeah, that's up here. Let's see. Paragraph 8. presentation of findings with low and very low confidence should be reserved for areas of major concern, and the reasons for their presentation should be carefully explained. Confidence should not be interpreted probabilistically and is distinct from statistical confidence. Additionally, a finding that includes a probabilistic measure of uncertainty does not require explicit mention of the level of confidence associated with the finding that finding if the level of confidence is high or very high. So what they're talking about is they have two different ways of looking at this. They have confidence and they have likelihood. And likelihood is where they get into the actual quantified uncertainty. When they're making a statement that they say likely or very likely or what have you. And that's actually what this handy little table is about. What they say, when they're saying something is very likely, this is the probability that they are assigning to it. In your head as a person, when you're saying something is very likely or it's virtually certain or it's unlikely or what have you, you are assigning your own probability to that in your own head of what's going to happen. Or if you think this is likely or unlikely or what have you, you're assigning a probability to that in your head. They just make it explicit that this is what they're working with. This is what they say this is what they think when they say unlikely or very unlikely or virtually certain or anything like that. That this is like 99 to 100%, what have you. You can make your own judgment whether or not you agree with that. I tend to side a little bit more with a lot of these people because I do know a lot of them are very good at what they do, and so I encourage that. But like I said, I'm perfectly open for you asking questions about it, having a discussion with me. So if you have thoughts, comments on anything related to this report that you see come up in a news article somewhere, shoot me a comment and let me know, because I'm happy to do a review of it and tell you what I think. And whether or not I think it's appropriate and correct in the conclusions. And, like I said, I've done reviews of articles on this channel before. I'm happy to do that again, just to let you know whether or not I think the article is legit or I think it's full of crap, and I will do that for the IPCC too. But I'm going to need some specifics from you all if there's something you want to look on, because I ain't going to sit down and review everything on a single YouTube video. It's incredibly long. There's a lot here. Built up over... Goodness, since 1850 really was when climate science really got rolling in its conception there in the 1850s. There's almost 200 years of science that goes into this now, which is pretty damn good, actually. So let's see here. So that's the important thing to keep in mind when you read the summary for policymakers, is they do have, confidence is more of an expert assessment from the authors. This is the probabilistic one of how likely they think something is. And that does usually involve some probabilistic assessment that's been done at some point. Usually, not always, is what I'm going to say there, because likely it can be used to express a probabilistic estimate of the occurrence of a single event or an outcome, observed, climate parameter, observed trend, projected change lying in a given range. Likelihood may be based on statistical or modeling analysis, elicitation of expert views, or other quantitative analyses. So often this is quantitative, the likelihood thing assignment here, but it doesn't necessarily have to be. So fuzzy boundaries can be implied at times. So like some of these are greater than or equal to 66% to 100% likelihood. And that's what they go with this, is that they about as likely as not is, 50-50 flipping a coin. They go from 33 to 66 with that. But they say here, let's go likely, very likely, all that kind of jazz in here. So there's that. And so that's where we can go back to the assessment report itself. So they're saying they have they have some confidence in this. They're very confident of what they're saying in here. And they think they're very confident that what has been happening since the 1700s is caused primarily by human activities. That is their assessment. I tend to agree with it, and I will show you in a second what I'm talking about with that. Here, let's see. Each of the last 4 decades has been successfully warmer than any decade. Yes, that's an observation we've had. Let's see. The likely range of total of human-caused global temperature increase from 1850 to 2010-2019 is between 8.8 Celsius and 1.3 Celsius. And yes, I know you're going to say 1 Celsius increase is not a big deal. That's the thing, is that's the global temperature, and the temperature of Earth is not warming at the same rate everywhere. So bear that in mind, that as much as 1C doesn't sound like much, for certain places in the world, it is actually a lot. The tropics are not warming as fast as the Arctic and the Antarctic are. And so that's actually a big big deal for them, is considering that that's been like that. So they've got a whole bunch of things in here. Precipitation has likely increased with a faster rate since the 1980s. So the likely is the probabilistic statement here. They're not super confident about this. They have a medium level of confidence, so they could probably end up being more. There's a lot of things in here that are specific. Again, I'm not going to read through all of this because I would be here all night. I did want to show this particular graphic here because this one in particular is the one you've seen a lot. It was in that BBC article. That's it right here. Different colors, but same graphic for all practical purposes. That's not the right one. And this is what I wanted to get in because I know people do give a knock on modeling and climate modeling and what we can do with that. But this is a point that I want to make with this particular graphic. So this is always in temperature anomalies. So this is how much the actual temperature is different from the average of the period. I think it's, yeah, the average of the period of 1850 to 1900. So this is why it's like right around, basically the lines here are the anomaly from 1950 to, of the year's temperature relative to the 1850 to 1900 average in here. So this kind of orangey thing here with the orangish line in here, one of the things that you can do in the modeling world is you can remove human activity and put it back and see what the difference would be in the temperature profile, and what does the observed actually match close to, and that's actually what they're doing in this graphic. This kind of black squiggly-ish line here, that is the observed anomaly, the observed change in temperatures. And it does actually match closely with both human and natural. And I do want to make the point that this is human and natural. But this would be the case if it was only natural here. And surprising that they're saying it's only solar and volcanic, but things like that in there is a point to point out. But human and natural is here, and natural only is here. And we do actually have confidence in the models being able to reproduce a lot of what we have observed in the past. Perfectly? No. No model is ever going to be 100% perfect. That's wishful thinking if we think we're going to get there. But within reason. And that's what these bounds are, is sort of the range of the climate models and what they suggest. So been within range, definitely, would be the thing there. And so that is confidence that things are going on. I would point out that, well, I'm not going to point that out here necessarily. And this is going back further. So when they're talking about, so this graphic right here is probably right in this particular section. What they're talking about right here is reconstructed temperature changes, and that comes from paleoclimate observations. And that's things like ice cores, sedimentation cores, things like that they can reconstruct what happened going back thousands of years. In this case, this is from the year 1 to year 2000. There's actually a little bit of overlap with the paleoclimate records and the historical records in here, what we have from weather stations and satellites and what have you. So that's the point I wanted to make with that. So they're trying to make a point here that what has been observed in this current time is warmer than what has been in the last several thousand years. And certainly because, well, warmer than the last several thousand years. And they actually do show something here that this was the warmest multi-century period in the last 100,000 years. I think that's the point of this graphic. Actually, I might be interpreting it wrong. Panel A, changes in direct surface temperature from paleoclimate archive, solid gray, and from direct observation, solid black line, both relative to the 1850 to 1900 decadal averaged. A vertical bar on the left shows the estimated temperature during the warmest, during the warmest multi-century period in the last 100,000 years, which occurred 6,500 years ago during the current interglacial period. The last interglacial, around 125,000 years ago, is the next most recent candidate for a period of higher temperature. These past warm periods were called by slow multi-millennial orbital variations. And what they're talking about is the Milankovitch cycle there. The gray shading with diagonal lines is shown the very likely ranges for the temperature reconstruction. So the point that they're trying to make is what we're seeing now is in line with things that have happened in the last 100,000 odd years ago when humans weren't around on the planet. And I know people want to say, well, the planet's been really warm before. The planet's been really warm before. The reason there are people who are concerned about it is the fact that, yes, the planet has been that warm before, but humans weren't around 100,000 years ago. That's the thing. Humans weren't around in 125,000 years ago, 6,500 years ago. There weren't all that many of us around at that time. And there have been, sudden shifts in climate which have caused the devastation to many ancient societies. So it is things like that we do see concerns about, and I can understand that. I don't, as I've said before, I'm from a political perspective, I'm not a fan of the top-down government run everything here. And I think there's a lot of things you can do bottom up, because global change doesn't necessarily reflect exactly how things will change locally. Because what we're looking at here is what the anomaly of the global average temperature is. And this is, again, 1C doesn't sound like much, but there's another graphic down here that I want to get to, just to make the point of what they're talking about. Where is it? Where is it? Come on, graphic. Here it is. So this is what they're talking about. So this is observed change with 1 degree Celsius of warming. You notice it's not uniform everywhere. That's because the climate isn't the same everywhere to begin with. It's much colder in the Arctic and the Antarctic than it is in the tropics. Specifically thinking, the Arctic in particular and the Antarctic is warming faster than the tropics are. And so that's why 1 degree C is a concern, because you start thinking about communities and ecosystems and things that are going on in far northern and far southern regions that have to figure out how to adapt and change with that. And that is concern for a lot of communities and local communities in those regions. And so think of like Barrow and communities in Alaska and along the lines like that too. But of course, not just there are things going on here too, which are important. So, and this is another thing to say, one of the reasons this graphic is included, because this is observed, this is simulated. This is another thing to make a point of, there is actually some confidence in what we're doing in trying to project these things. The models have actually gotten pretty damn close to what it would look like. So, missed a few things here and there, yes, but in general, it's actually pretty decent in my expert opinion with that. Annual temperature change relative 1850 to 1900. So this is going on now that you've seen the two side by side that are really close. What they're trying to do here is to suggest how much warmer different parts of the world will get, that it ends up resulting in a 1.5 degree C above 1850 to 1900 average temperature globally. And likewise for 2C and for 4C. Now, the 2C and 4C in this is what the global average temperature would be. This is what we think would be the changes in each region. And I hope that makes sense, but that's the idea we're getting at here, because the climate doesn't change the same everywhere. And just because it's snowing where you are doesn't mean it's getting really warm elsewhere. And there's a whole thing I can do and talk about the extremes, but I don't want to let this video run too long, because there is a bucket ton of stuff I could talk about with this. So if there's something specific that you want me to talk about, let me know. But my general sort of stand-up rule with this applies, in that I would not be freaking out. Let's put it that way. I would not be freaking out. I don't think it's helpful to freak out here, because both with, in particular, since we're talking about things with policy that get into societal lots of societal interactions and what have you, you have to be able to think very carefully about the climate, what does it affect, but also then if you do adopt a policy, what does that affect? And all of the people that it affects, and how does it affect them? And reacting with the hyperbole that the news articles would want, and that some very, very vocal advocates want, is not actually a helpful way to move forward and actually build a wise policy that will be beneficial to all, and protect those who are most vulnerable. Because in fairness, there are some low-lying Pacific Island communities that are very nervous that as sea level rises, their island is just going to disappear. So I'm very nervous about that, and I can understand that with some of the things that are going on that they're concerned about. Again, end of century kind of thing, but you're talking also about moving a whole population that has lived on that island for how many generations. So this is where it gets into some really difficult things to talk about and nuanced things to talk about. And that's why I don't think it's a good idea to react with hyperbole to this, and I'm disappointed with a lot of the news articles, though I was honestly expecting it when it came out. So that's my general take, and I just wanted to give this kind of broad over introduction here to what was going on. And I think if you really want to get in here and start digging into it, I would take the time to actually read the summary for policymakers yourself, and read about what they're talking about. And I would also say, if you have questions, I'm going to be very open with this. If you have questions and you want me to dig into something and do a video on something very specific, not just the summary for policymakers in its entirety or the whole report its entirety, but to dig into certain aspects and talk about it so it gives you more clarity, so you're talking with others about it, please comment, let me know, whether you be on Locals, whether you be on YouTube or on Twitter, let me know, because then I can get into something and break it down a little bit more for you. I think for a long time, IPCC has lived in a black box, and we've been quasi-reliant on different communicators to do things. So to provide information who may not be the best actors. I live and work and breathe in this stuff all the time, so I can help break down what's great about it, what's accurate, and what's not. Again, bear in mind that I'm just one person, and I do come into this with my own sort of biases in this. But I'm talking about the science. I'm not talking about the policy here. I just want to break down what the science information here says. So I'm happy to do that. Please comment. Let me know what you think. If you have particular questions, probably this will be the first of many videos. If there's a lot of you who comment and tell me, I want you to talk about this particular thing or that particular thing, again, I'm happy to go into that. But that's my top level view, and my general sort of guidance here stands. If you're seeing a hyperbolic news article, don't freak out and go crazy with it. I very much encourage you, because there are many, many scientists around the country who, part of their day job, including me, is actually talking to people about what the report says and what it means, what it doesn't mean also. I actually had a conversation earlier today. I was like, oh, I noticed the wildfires are getting seem to be getting more intense and what have you. And we talked about the difference between, climate making a wildfire more likely, or on average more intense, versus the fact that climate doesn't start a fire. It could be started by something as easily as some idiot throwing a cigarette out the window. But climate can make things more intense. It can make things happen more frequently and things like that. And I think up here they do have a graphic on different extreme events. It's somewhere in here. Yeah, they were talking about extreme events. I'm not a huge fan of how they laid this out. They were trying to make these very news-friendly, is what I noticed. They were trying to make these as news-friendly as possible to be put out there. So, there's different sections and regions in here. I don't know what all the acronyms stand for off the top of my head. So I think this is New Zealand in here. This is parts of Australia. And they were trying to arrange it roughly to look like the world, I can tell. So this is different sections of Africa and the Middle East and Western Europe, Asia in here. This is North America. So this is Northwestern North America, Eastern North America. This is Greenland and Iceland in here. So Northern Central America, Southern Central America, small islands in the Caribbean, South America, very far South America, things like that. So this is actually the increase in the hot extremes that has been observed. So this is observed things that we're talking about, and confidence in the human contribution of that. So there's things like that. There's also things of change in heavy precipitation. Again, they're talking about observed here. This is not actually projected that they're talking about in this graphic. So things like that you can get into. And I encourage you, get into it. If you're interested in it, look into it, what have you. Ask me a question. I will happily answer it. So that's it for now. If you liked the video, please comment, please share, subscribe to the channel, all that jazz. You can also catch up with me on SciWorthy.locals.com. If you become a supporter there, you can interact with me and other scientists who are also there as supporters. Anyway, that's it for now. Like I said, please comment, and I please encourage you, scientists themselves do know what they're doing. They are very nonpartisan for the most part. Whether or not the whole report is entirely nonpartisan and the summary for policymakers is nonpartisan, whether or not the summary for policymakers is nonpartisan is questionable. I think the report genuinely is, or at least tries to be nonpartisan. No guarantee of that, but I do believe it is very much nonpartisan. So I think there's good stuff in here, lots of good stuff. Again, don't go crazy with the hyperbole, though. Don't freak out at the end of the world kind of nonsense. That doesn't help us get anything done anyway. But please feel free to comment, ask me a question, ask me to look into a particular aspect. I'd appreciate it. I'm happy to, and I will give you my honest hot take as much as I can. I really, really will do my best to be very honest with you about what is and what isn't, and what I see as good and what I see as bad. Thanks for watching. Until next time, I'm Adrian. Stay curious, my friends.